Welcome back to the Velvet Story. Tonight, let the world slow down. Find a quiet place, get comfortable, and breathe for a moment. Because this isn't just a story. It's a place to rest, a place to feel, a place where love lingers a little longer than it should. So dim the lights, listen closely, and let me take you somewhere else. This is She Only Loved Him When It Rained, Part 1. It began long before either of them understood what was happening, before the rules were known, before the waiting became routine, before the rain learned their names. On the first day it happened, the sky was undecided. Clouds drifted slowly over the city, not heavy enough to promise rain, not light enough to disappear. The streets below moved as they always did, cars stopping and starting, people crossing with their heads down, time folding into itself in small, ordinary ways. He stood near the edge of the sidewalk, watching the clouds instead of the traffic. Most people noticed him only briefly. He looked like someone waiting, nothing more. But there was something still about him, as if he had learned patience from something far larger than himself. When the first drop of rain fell, it landed on his hand. He didn't move. He only closed his fingers slightly, as if acknowledging a signal. Across the street, a woman slowed her steps. She lifted her face towards the sky, surprised, not by the rain itself, but by the feeling that came with it, an unnamed sensation, sudden and familiar, like a memory brushing past without stopping. Then she saw him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain grew heavier, and she smiled. It wasn't a smile meant for strangers. It wasn't cautious or polite. It was instinctive, unguarded, the kind of smile that arrived before logic could interfere. "You're late," she said. He felt something loosen in his chest. "I know, I always am," he replied. They laughed, even though neither of them understood the joke yet. She did not remember him when the sun was out. On clear mornings, she awoke with a sense of completeness. Her life felt whole in a quiet, unquestioned way. She moved through her routines without hesitation. Work, errands, conversations, plans. He existed nowhere in those days. If she passed him on the street, she did not recognize his face. If he stood beside her in a line or sat across from her in a cafe, she might notice him the way one notices a stranger briefly, an impression without weight. But when it rained, something shifted. The change was never violent. It didn't arrive like a shock or revelation. It unfolded gently, like fog lifting from a familiar landscape. At first it was a feeling, then a voice, then a presence, and finally memory. The first time the rain stopped too soon, she forgot him mid-sentence. They had been sitting under a narrow awning, the city blurring around them as the rain fell steadily. She was telling him about a dream she used to have as a child, one where she stood in a field she didn't recognize, waiting for something she couldn't name. "I think I was waiting for you," she said softly. The rain slowed. She blinked. Her expression changed, not to fear, not to confusion exactly, but to distance, like someone waiting from a dream and realizing the room is unfamiliar. "I'm sorry, have we met?" The rain stopped completely. He felt the silence press down between them. "No, I don't think so," he answered gently. She nodded, embarrassed. "I must be tired." She left a moment later, apologizing again, thanking him for the conversation she no longer remembered. He stayed where he was long after she disappeared into the crowd. That was the moment he understood. This wasn't something that could be explained easily. This was something that obeyed rules. He began to observe. Rain of any kind mattered. Heavy storms brought everything back quickly, memories, emotions, intimacy. Light rain worked slowly, as if her mind needed time to open the door. Drizzle made her uneasy. She would look at him longer than she should, frown slightly, as if struggling to place a word just out of reach. Cloudy days without rain were the hardest. She felt something missing but couldn't identify it. She grew restless, thoughtful, distant. And sunny days? Sunny days erased him completely. He learned not to approach her then. Once early on he tried. He called her name on a bright afternoon. She turned, startled, clearly wondering how a stranger knew it. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Do I know you?" Something in her tone stopped him from pushing further. Love, he realized, could not be forced into existence, especially not this kind. Rain became their time. They adjusted their lives around weather forecasts without ever admitting it aloud. He learned the patterns of the sky. She learned, unknowingly, the patterns of her heart. They met beneath bridges, in quiet cafes, in parks where the rain softened the noise of the city. They talked without wasting a moment, as if both of them sensed how fragile their time was. Sometimes she asked the same questions again. "How did we meet? How long has this been happening? Why does it feel like I've lost you before?" Each time he answered honestly, but gently. He never told her how much it hurt on sunny days. He never told her how many times he watched her walk past him without recognition. On rainy nights, she noticed the sadness he carried. "You look tired," she said once, brushing rain from his coat. "Like someone who waits too much." He smiled. "I wait for the right things." She hated the forgetting, not because it confused her, but because it felt wrong. When the rain came, memories returned with an ache behind them, as if they were reclaiming something that should never have been taken. She began leaving notes for herself on rainy days. Simple things at first. "You love the sound of rain. You trust him." Later the notes became longer. "If you're reading this on a sunny day and don't understand why your chest feels heavy, it's because you're missing him. Please don't be afraid." But the notes didn't help much. On sunny days, they felt like messages written by someone else. She stopped writing them eventually. "It's like my heart remembers what my mind refuses to keep," she told him one evening as rain traced slow lines down the window beside them. "That might be enough," he said. She shook her head. "I want all of it." He searched for answers more seriously then, not out of desperation, but out of respect for her pain. He read old texts, listened to stories passed down through families who spoke of memory as something alive, something that could be shaped by love or loss. One story appeared again and again, told in different ways but always ending the same. A soul that loved too deeply once, a choice made to survive, memory divided to protect the heart. The rain, the story claimed, was not the cause. It was the permission. He never told her the details. Some truths he knew had to arrive on their own. Time passed differently for them. Weeks felt like days, days felt like pauses. Their relationship did not grow in a straight line. It grew in fragments, intense, meaningful moments separated by absence. And yet, something unexpected happened. She began to sense him even without rain. On clear evenings, she sometimes felt watched, not in fear, but in comfort. She would turn suddenly, certain she'd see someone familiar. Once, she dreamt of him on a sunny night. She woke with tears on her face and no memory of why. The next time it rained, she ran to him. "I dreamt of you," she said breathlessly. "Does that mean something?" He looked at her carefully. "Yes," he said, "I think it does." They stopped calling it a curse. They stopped trying to name it at all. Instead, they treated it like something fragile that deserved care. They made promises they could keep, to never lie to each other on rainy days, to never interfere on sunny ones, to let love exist without demanding permanence. And slowly, quietly, the rules bent. Not enough to break, but enough to hope. On one morning, the rain stopped earlier than expected. She still remembered him. They said nothing. They simply stayed together, watching the clouds thin, listening to the city wake up. For the first time, forgetting did not come immediately. Outside, the sky hesitated, as if it too was learning that some things were worth allowing to stay. The rain never lasted forever, but it always returned, and with it, love. Not perfect, not simple, but patient and waiting. She only loved him when it rained. Part 2. The first thing she noticed was that the forgetting no longer arrived all at once. It used to be sudden, like a door closing without warning. One moment she would be standing beside him, holding his hand, and the next she would be staring at a stranger, unsure how she had arrived there. But now the forgetting came slowly. On the morning it began, the rain had ended just before dawn. The city woke beneath a sky that was pale and undecided. Clouds stretched thin like something that had almost vanished. She stood at the window of her apartment, watching the streets below, and felt something shift inside her. The memory of him was still there, not sharp, not complete, but present. She pressed her hand against her chest, as if checking whether something fragile was still intact. It was. She didn't tell him right away. Some things felt too delicate to speak aloud. They had learned over time how to exist in the spaces between certainty. On rainy days they spoke freely, on sunny days they kept their distance. But now those rules began to blur at the edges. She would catch herself thinking of him without knowing why. She would hear his voice in her mind, not clearly, not in words, but in tone, in feeling. On clear afternoons, she sometimes found herself walking the same streets she walked with him when it rained, sitting in cafes she did not remember choosing. Once, she found herself standing beneath a bridge, staring at the dry pavement, waiting. She didn't know for what, only that it mattered. He noticed the change before she mentioned it. He always did. There was a way she looked at him now on sunny days, not recognition, but something close to it. A pause, a hesitation, as if her heart was trying to speak over the noise of her thoughts. One afternoon, as they passed each other on opposite sides of the street, she slowed. She turned back. He stopped too, though he knew he shouldn't. For a long moment they stood there, separated by nothing but light and certainty. "I don't remember you," she said carefully. "I know. But I feel like I should." He nodded once. "That's new." She laughed softly, though her eyes were troubled. "Is it?" "Yes." They didn't say anything else. They walked away from each other, but neither of them forgot that moment. That night, it rained in her dreams. She stood in a place she had never seen while awake. A wide, empty field beneath a sky that seemed impossibly close. The air smelt like rain even though none fell. He stood there with her. Not younger, not older, the same. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, though she didn't know how she knew. "Neither are you," he replied. She looked down at her hands. They were glowing faintly, as if lit from within. "What is this place?" He hesitated. "This is where it started." She woke with tears on her face. The sky outside was clear, but the feeling did not leave. She confronted him on the next rainy evening. They sat in the quiet corner of a cafe, rain tapping steadily against the glass. She watched his face carefully, noticing the way he chose his words. "You know more than you tell me," she said. "Yes." "About why this happens?" "Yes." She didn't accuse him, she didn't demand, she simply waited. He sighed, the sound heavy with years. "There are stories," he began, "about love that survives too much, about hearts that don't know when to stop holding on." She leaned closer. "One version says we met before this life, that we loved each other without limits, without fear." "And that was a mistake?" "No," he said softly. "It was everything." She swallowed. "Then why am I like this?" He looked at the rain. "Because loving like that costs something. And when the cost became too great, you were given a choice." He told her the story slowly, of a life lived somewhere between memory and myth, a time when they had known each other without interruption, without separation, a love that burned so brightly it consumed everything else. They had promised never to forget each other, even in death. And when death came, that promise had been honored, but not without consequence. Her soul had remembered too much, the grief, the loss, the ending. It followed her into the next life like a shadow. So the choice was made, not by gods, not by fate, but by her, to remember love only when it was safe, to let the rain carry the weight of memory. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. So this was my decision. Yes. Then why do I feel like I'm outgrowing it? He met her gaze. Because maybe you're ready to remember more. That idea terrified her, because remembering meant pain. It meant loss. It meant carrying the full weight of loving someone who could still be taken away. But forgetting, she realized, carried its own kind of pain. A quiet one, a hollow one. She didn't want either extreme anymore. She wanted something whole. The changes accelerated after that. Rain was no longer required for memory. It only strengthened it. She remembered him through overcast days, through evenings when the sky was heavy but dry. Once, on a bright morning, she woke knowing his name. She laughed out loud alone in her apartment, surprised by her own joy. She ran to find him. He was standing beneath the same street light where they had first met again in this life. The sky was clear. "You're not supposed to remember me now," he said. "I know, but I do." He searched her face, afraid. "Are you in pain?" She shook her head. "No, I feel complete." For the first time, he didn't look like someone waiting. He looked like someone arriving. But the world did not change without resistance. Her memories returned unevenly. Some days she remembered too much too quickly. Old grief surfaced without context. Emotions arrived before explanations. There were nights she cried without knowing why. He stayed with her through all of it. And slowly she understood the truth beneath the story. The rain had never been the cause. It had been a shield. One evening, as they walked together under a sky heavy with clouds, she stopped. "If I remember everything, what happens to us?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't think love disappears when it's remembered fully." She smiled. "Then let it rain when it wants to," she said. "I don't need to hide anymore." Above them, the clouds shifted. The first drop fell. But this time, it wasn't permission. It was celebration. The rain no longer controlled their love. It accompanied it. And as the city continued around them, unaware of what had changed, they stood together, no longer bound by weather, no longer afraid of memory. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had finally been accepted. She only loved him when it rained. Part 3. When the rain stopped mattering, she noticed the silence first. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of tension. For as long as she could remember, longer than this life, longer than words, there had always been something waiting, something held back, a quiet pressure beneath every moment, as if the world itself was bracing for loss. Now that pressure was gone. The sky was clear when she woke the morning after she remembered everything. No clouds, no threat of rain. She lay still in bed, eyes open, breathing slowly, half expecting the familiar hollowing sensation to arrive, the forgetting, the fading. It didn't. Instead, memories settled gently into place like books returning to shelves they had once belonged to. She remembered him, not as a feeling, not as an echo, but as a constant. She turned her head and saw him sitting by the window, watching the light change across the walls. "You're still here," she said. He looked at her immediately, searching her face for hesitation, for pain, for signs that this had been too much. "I am," he replied. "Are you?" She sat up slowly. "Yes," she said, "I think I finally am." The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had known. There was no clear moment when the past finished arriving, no single memory that marked completion. Instead, remembrance came in layers. Some memories were light, the way he used to laugh without sound in another life, the way she once braided flowers into his hair while the world was still young, the way they used to fall asleep without fear of waking apart. Others were heavier, the arguments that had ended in silence, the loss they had carried together, the moment she had chosen to forget, not because she didn't love him, but because loving him had nearly broken her. She didn't relive these memories all at once. They came when she was ready, and when they came, he was there. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull her under. One evening, as they walked through the city at dusk, she stopped suddenly, breath-catching. "I remember dying," she said quietly. He turned to her but didn't speak. "I remember thinking I would find you again," she continued. "I remember being afraid that I wouldn't." She closed her eyes. "And I remember choosing this life. Choosing to forget you sometimes so I wouldn't lose myself completely." She looked at him then, afraid of what she might see in his face. He reached for her hands. "You didn't leave me," he said. "You survived." She exhaled slowly. For the first time the memory didn't hurt. The world adjusted around them without noticing. They returned to ordinary things, work, routines, conversations with friends who never knew how close love had come to being erased entirely. But something about her had changed. She no longer felt divided. On sunny days, she felt just as full as she did during storms. Rain still stirred something deep in her chest, but it no longer controlled access to her heart. The weather became what it was meant to be, just weather. He struggled more than she did at first, not with memory, but with fear. For so long his love had existed inside rules, boundaries, conditions that kept him vigilant, careful, restrained. Now those rules were gone. He didn't know how to love her without bracing himself for loss. One night, as rain fell gently outside but no longer carried meaning, he admitted it. "I don't know who I am if I'm not waiting," he said. She considered him carefully. "Then don't wait," she said. "Stay." He laughed softly. "That sounds harder." She smiled. It always was. They began to build something new, not a repetition of the past and not a denial of it, something informed by memory but not ruled by it. They learned how to argue without fear, how to speak about pain without reopening wounds, how to love without measuring time. Some days were quiet, some days were overwhelming, but none of them felt incomplete. The rain still came, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, but now when it did, it brought no urgency, no desperation, no race against forgetting. They would sit together and listen to it, hands intertwined, letting it remind them of where they had been, not where they were trapped. One afternoon, during a long storm, she said something that surprised him. "I think the rain remembers us," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I think it was never about control. It was about protection, about giving me space to grow into remembering without breaking." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like something you would choose." She smiled. "I did." As time passed, the past life memories softened. They didn't disappear, they integrated. She no longer felt like she was living multiple versions of herself. She felt like one continuous story, complex, scarred, but whole. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future without conditions, not eternal, not perfect, just honest. One night, long after the rain had ended, she stood on the balcony and watched the clouds drift apart. "I used to think loving you meant losing myself," she said. He joined her. "And now?" "And now I know it means remembering who I am." He took her hand. They stood there in silence, the city breathing below them, the sky open and unafraid. For the first time, neither of them felt watched by fate. The rain never stopped existing, but it stopped being a gatekeeper. It became a witness. And as they moved forward into days that no longer required permission to love, something ancient finally rested. Not because the story had ended, but because it no longer needed to be guarded. She only loved him when it rained. Part 4. For a while, nothing happened. And that was what frightened them most. Not storms, not memory, not loss, just stillness. After everything they had endured, the rain-bound memories, the slow return of the past, the careful rebuilding of love, life became strangely ordinary. Days passed without signs or symbols. The sky was simply the sky. Clouds came and went without meaning. Rain fell without consequence. She remembered him every morning, every night, without effort, without fear. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the quiet after a long war, unsure whether the silence meant peace or something waiting. He noticed it first, the unease. Not in her, in himself. For months, maybe years, he'd lived like someone guarding a fragile flame. Every happiness came with preparation for loss. Every moment of love carried the shadow of, what if this disappears tomorrow? But now there was nothing to guard against, no rules, no conditions, no weather to watch. He didn't know how to stop expecting something to go wrong. One morning he woke before her and lay still listening to her breathe. The light coming through the window was soft and gold. Normal, too normal. He studied her face the way someone studies something they're afraid to lose, and a thought slipped in, quiet and unwelcome. What if this is temporary too? He hated himself for thinking it, but love that had once been fragile didn't suddenly feel unbreakable. It felt suspicious. She sensed it. She always did. That evening, as they walked home together, she slipped her hand into his. "You're waiting again," she said. He didn't pretend not to understand. "I don't know how not to," he admitted. She squeezed his fingers. "Then maybe the world needs to prove it to you." "Prove what?" "That it's over." As if the world had been listening, the weather began to change. Not into rain, into absence. The forecasts predicted something unusual. A long stretch of clear skies. No storms, no clouds, no rain at all. 10 days, then 12, then 2 full weeks. Meteorologists called it a rare high-pressure system. People celebrated the sunshine. Parks filled, streets grew louder, the air felt lighter. But for them, the brightness felt like a question.